Sure. Hi, I'm Angela. I work for the New York Press. So it's a group of community newspapers that are sent to subscribers in the paper boxes in Manhattan. And it's four newspapers, so I get a full page Q&A. So it's done in a Q&A form.
Great. All right. Sounds good.
All right, great. So this is your directorial debut, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So I read an interview where you said that you kind of had a little bit of experience with that observing Lena Dunham on girls.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So first of all, would you want to do a reboot of Girls? And second of all, what surprised you about being on the other side of the camera?
A reboot? How old do you think we are? It hasn't been that
anymore?
long. Hasn't been that long since that show's been on.
Well,
No,
I don't know.
I
I feel
think
like Gossip Girl rebooted.
well, that's a good point. That's a good point. No, I with a whole new cast though. I mean, yeah, I suppose you could do a
Right,
different
that's right.
version of Girls. Yeah. Um uh what was the second part of the question?
Okay, the second part of the question was, what surprised you being on the other side of the camera?
Oh, on the other side. I was well, I was pleasantly surprised about things that I hadn't really expected as either a director or a writer of this episode that the actors brought to the table, which was really great. I was very lucky that I was able to cast a handful of my friends in roles in this episode because I knew I was going to be very nervous, and they're very talented actors and very successful in their own right. And it was great to have them there. But the two leads of the episode, Zane and Marquise, I did not know, and I loved their auditions, and I loved we met on Zoom, and we had we did a little bit of a chemistry read, and they were both so great. But they brought things to this episode that I couldn't even imagine. Just like just depth and warmth and humor, and I was just so blown away by both of them. They were the greatest surprise of this whole process.
Yeah, so I live on the Upper West Side in New York, and I was working at the Amazon bookstore when Modern Love the book came out, and
Oh,
I sold a lot of copies of it to people, like recommending it, but I had never read it myself. So I finally read it during the pandemic. So I remember your story. It obviously resonated because I'm single in New York dating. So it's always that question of, do I answer my phone? Do I turn it on? Do I turn it upside down? Do I not look at it? So I
yep.
totally, being in the moment. So what was it like revisiting that? I mean, you wrote the story, but what was it like revisiting that for the show?
It was a little hard to go back and to sort of relive some of the mistakes that um, I made at 22. I mean, that was tricky, but there was also some distance between not only time, but I was able to sort of expand this episode and sort of create characters rather than it be strictly a version of events from that night. So I felt a little more removed as a
Right.
storyteller from it, which was good. But it's also, and when this happened, this was in 2001. I think I had, as most people did, a very different relationship with their phone. I think now everybody has their phones on them all the time and are in front of them, and we can do so much more with our phones. I had a very basic flip phone at this time that did not get text messages because no one was texting at this time.
Right.
So it really was just a phone, which sometimes I miss. I miss just having a phone, and not like all of the stuff that comes with it. So, I mean, I did debate at one point about like, well, does this have to take place in 2001? Because is it, if this happened today, I would read a text message that says like,
Sure.
"Hey, it's
Right.
urgent. Call me back right now."
Right. Right.
But at that time, that wasn't really an option. So was a bit of there took a bit of maneuvering to make it work today with the way that phones work, but hopefully we figured all that out.
So you were looking at Astoria at the time. So I'm originally from Astoria. I'm a native Astoria. So
Oh, okay.
I loved your quote when you said like, getting people to come to Astoria at the end of the night was like a big deal back then. So was that your first apartment in New York?
My first apartment in New York was in Brooklyn Heights.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, I was in Brooklyn Heights, and then I was on 125th and Broadway.
Oh, okay.
I lived there for a while. And then this was my first apartment alone. It was a sublet, so it wasn't really my apartment and it wasn't my furniture, it wasn't my stuff, but it was my first apartment alone. It was in Astoria on 30th Ave and 35th Street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I loved it. And at that time, there were a lot of young actors living
Mhm.
there because it was, I mean, now it's, sort of, significantly gone up in rent, but at the time it was more affordable. So I was surrounded by a lot of young people my age who also were pursuing acting.
Yeah, I remember I went on a few dates with the guy. Again, he was like, I have to go to Astoria, but he's like, we call it Actoria. I'm like, I never heard that expression. It was hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
um,
It's true. Yeah. But yes, getting somebody well, hell, getting a cab to go to Astoria at that time was tricky. I mean, I remember learning that trick very early when I lived in Brooklyn, to not tell them where you were going until the door was closed because they technically were not supposed to refuse you. But I
right,
had a
right.
lot of cab drivers be like, I'm not going to Astoria, and be like, it's too late. I shut the door. And like, yelling at cab drivers and be like, it's a law. I don't know if it was a law, but I was very entitled, very entitled after a couple drinks. And I was like, you're taking me to Astoria, lower level.
Lower level.
You know
Oh
what
my
I'm
God, that's
talking about.
of course. So you were in LA and then you came back. When did you come back to New York during the pandemic?
Uh, September. No, that's not true. August. I came back in
August.
August, and then we filmed this episode in Schenectady, and I went up there, I think the week before Labor Day.
What was that?
So
What
yeah,
was that?
so what was it like?
I was gonna say, like, what COVID precautions did you take? How did you? So you had already cast everyone.
Yes, everyone was cast. This was one of the first productions back in New York, so the protocol was all a little new to all of us. So we were getting PCR tests, I think, twice a week or three times a week, and rapid tested every day. And then the protocol on set was, to socially distance as much as possible. Obviously, that's hard for the cast. I can't do that. But then for the crew, we all had masks and face shields, or masks and goggles. It was a lot to sort of get through, but I think everybody was so excited to be back at work that we were willing to sort of, do whatever it took to get back. And once we got used to the protocol of it, it really was just sort of business as usual.
So was your first major role in New York Pokemon?
um, you know what? Yeah, I guess. If you don't count the Westchester Broadway Dinner Theater, that was my like Radio City debut was Pokemon Live. Yeah, when I
Right.
was 20. In fact, that was the year before this story took place, is that I was in Pokemon Live at Radio City. Sad
So
time.
so how old were you and when did you find out that you landed the role in Book of Mormon?
I was 31.
Mhm.
I was 31. Yeah. And I was cast in a workshop. It was a really quick, sort of hectic, no, not that hectic. It was pretty straightforward, audition process. The only thing that was very different, and then I knew it was going to be a unique experience, was that they flew me to Los Angeles to read with Josh Gad and meet with Trey Parker and Matt Stone. And that's when I was like, well, Broadway doesn't normally fly people anywhere. So I was like, this is a big deal. But yeah, I got it. And then I don't know, it all moved very quickly. I gotta say, we did a workshop, and
Mhm.
then we got the green light that we were going to Broadway. And a few months later, we were in rehearsals. And for being as huge of a moment in my life as it is, it was a pretty seamless process once we got into it. It's pretty crazy.
So going to the prom, I just wanted to ask you, I went to a Catholic high school in Queens. You went to a Catholic high school in Nebraska?
Nebraska.
Okay. So did you go to your prom?
I sure did. I went to a lot of proms. Starting like freshman year, I started getting asked to proms because I went to an all boys school, but there were 4 all girls schools in
Mhm.
Omaha, and all those girls needed dates. And I guess they felt like they could only take Catholics. And I like to dance, and I wasn't going to feel you up. So I was like a
Right,
slam dunk prom date.
right.
So respectful, looked good in a tux, got a good corsage,
Oh
didn't
my
try to
gosh.
do anything with you. So I was very popular. I went to a lot of proms, a lot of proms.
So I saw that interview you did with Fallon where you said you really want to be in Rent.
Oh,
And you said that was really funny when you talked about the confirmation topper. That was very funny.
oh,
Um,
thank you. Thank you.
so going to boys, what was Jim Parsons like to work with? I'm
Oh,
a
he was a
huge Big Bang Theory fan, so I'm just curious.
So is my mother, and my mother was so excited about that. And I was excited. I had met Jim before and we had hung out, but I couldn't really say that I knew him really well. But then we just really hit it off when we were in rehearsals and became very close. And then when we got to Broadway, our dressing rooms were next to each other. So
Oh,
Jim and I would come to work obscenely early sometimes just to hang out. And usually what would happen is he would come into my dressing room and we would read the newspaper together, and we would just like have our coffee and sit in the dressing room and read our newspaper and just be like, oh, did you see that? Look what's there's fire in the subway, and just like talk to each other like some old couple, which was so much fun. But he was just such a treat, and it was so really amazing to watch him play that part, because I think a lot of people know him as Sheldon, and to watch him play that very sad, very cruel man in Boys in the Band it's such a turn for him. And I think he's just brilliant.
so you fell in love yourself on Broadway during that show. So did you have to hide it from people, or I mean, how could you hide that? Can you?
Well, we were playing a couple. Tuck Watkins and I were playing a couple in Boys in the Band, a couple that fights a lot, a couple that blows up at each other on stage at the end of the show in this really sort of volatile moment. So, I mean, I think so there was a closeness that developed between us that I don't think was surprising to anyone in the cast. So that part wasn't hard, but we didn't really start dating until we started doing the movie a year later. That's when we, I think, sort of got back together, and I started thinking, I was like, I still am, really thinking about that guy. And I feel like here we are again doing this thing. And so that's when it really, really started. But it is odd. I mean, the first time that we ever kissed was for work. Um, so that's weird. That's the life of an actor, though, I suppose, is that like that's how it
Well, that's good. You
works.
test the chemistry right away. There you go.
True, exactly. That's a good point.
Kind
That's a
of
very good
cool,
point.
actually.
Yeah, I got paid to do it.
Even better. That's awesome. So my last question is with like Broadway reopening. Number one, what's a show you want to see when Broadway reopens? And number two, what's a dream role you still want to play on Broadway?
Oh boy. What is the show? There's so many things that are, I have a lot of friends who were in Mrs. Doubtfire. And one of my oldest friends, Jen Gambatese, and my a
Oh,
friend Cameron Adams is also in the show. And so I'm very excited for them. They had just started previews. I think they only got like 2 previews in before they were shut down. And there was some talk about would they reopen, would they not reopen, but they're definitely reopening. So I'm very excited to see that. And then my friend James Lapine also has a show at Lincoln Center called Flying Over Sunset. James wrote Into the Woods, and he wrote Falsettos that I was in, and directed Falsettos. And so I'm very excited to see that. And I guess if I've learned anything, I've always been surprised by the opportunities I've had on Broadway, and I haven't really plotted anything out too much, because it usually doesn't work out quite the way that you think it's going to. So I don't have a specific role, but I mean, I know I would love to work with James Lapine again. I know I'd like to do that. So maybe.
great. So really quickly, my dad has a restaurant right by Lincoln Center. It's a French restaurant called La Boîte en Bois on 68th and Columbus. So if you're ever in the area, come
Okay.
visit.
Oh, that's good to know. All right. Thank you.
And those are
I'll
all my
check it
questions.
out.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you. Have a good one.
Bye. Stay well. Nice to see you. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
JPI,